As- Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to another episode on the Speak Sense podcast. Today we are blessed, alhamdulillah, to feature an amazing human being, an amazing person, someone who I've been following their journey for some time online virtually, and it's an absolute privilege to have them on the show with us. Today, inshallah, we have Mr. Tharik Hussain, who is a travel writer and author. MashaAllah, and inshallah, during this podcast, you will find out a lot more about him, about his work, which I find very inspiring myself. So help me in giving him a big round of applause. Woo! Absolutely amazing to have you on. And MashaAllah, it's great to have you here on the Speak Sense podcast.
Thank you so much. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And it's amazing to have you here. Obviously, as I said in a small introduction, I've seen some of your work on online, mainly LinkedIn. MashaAllah, it's really great. Obviously, I've seen recently, you obviously done a book launch, and you had when you sign autographs, you had a day where it was very good, and you were surrounded by some really cool people as well. But inshallah, we'll speak a little bit about that and about your books a bit later on. So very quickly, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey, and what led you to the career that you're in at the minute.
So a little bit about myself, I guess I should start from the beginning. I was born in Bangladesh in the northeast, in and around a region known as Sylhet. And as we spoke earlier off air, a lot of the people that are born from that part of Bangladesh migrated to the East End of London. So I'm part of the very large British Bangladeshi community that we find in and around the London borough of Tower Hamlets. And that's essentially where I grew up. I arrived there when I was 3 years old. I've spent most of my life in the UK. I did briefly live and teach English in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. And other than that, I've gone back to Bangladesh several times and spent quite lengthy periods there. And of course, as a travel writer and author, I've also traveled extensively across the globe and spent lengthy periods of time in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, and across Europe. In terms of the career, I've always been a writer in many ways. I was a journalist quite some time ago now. I began life at a newspaper called Eastern Eye. This is kind of before the internet came along and killed printed news. And Eastern Eye back then was really the kind of red top, the tabloid of the Asian world. It was where most of us South Asians got our news, got our celebrity stuff, got our sports stuff, all. And it was very, very successful. And that's where I cut my teeth. But I was working there around the time of 9/11. And as you can imagine, being a journalist in 9/11 had quite a dramatic effect on my career and my perspective. And soon after that, I was also dealing with the fallout of the Brixton shoe bomber, as he's famously known, and of course 7/7, and all these things happened at more or less in a quite a short space of time, and it affected the way I saw the world, and it also affected the way I saw my role in media. And I decided to take a bit of a kind of a backseat. I stepped out of journalism, mainstream journalism, because I decided it wasn't for me, and I went into teaching. And I'm a qualified teacher and have been teaching in the FE section for the last nearly 2 decades now. But I never really stopped writing in the background, and I picked the pen back up when I realized that the kind of journey that I began around the time of the 9/11 and 7/7 fallout, when I made the decision to take my young family and move to Saudi Arabia, the journey that I began then, I realized that I needed to do more with it. And what I mean by that is, when I first went to Saudi Arabia to kind of effectively do a recce, to establish, is this a place I want to live? We had relatives through my wife living out there, and they were encouraging us, come and have a go here, and you can teach English and so on. It was an interesting time for me as a young father and a family man. And I thought, why not? And en route to Saudi Arabia for that first Umrah, we stopped over in Cyprus.
Okay.
And it was a very lengthy layover in Cyprus, and we wanted to do something during that time. 9 hours we had to kill. You know, it was a very cheap flight because we were very poor, and we just bought the cheapest tickets we could get. And I did a bit of research. This is pre-internet, so I had to use those things called books, you know. And as part of the research, we found, well, I came across this description of these masjids with overlooking these salt lakes not too far from Larnaca airport. And, you know, that's really all that excited me. I thought, why not? You know, I was into my Islamic history, and I was beginning to develop that interest. Anyway, long story short, we went and visited it. I didn't think much of it. In fact, at the time, because I was leaning towards a more conservative Islam, I was put out by the fact that there was a shrine in there, and, you know, I was freaked out. And the caretaker handed me a booklet about the place. And I kind of put that in my bag and have carried it with me ever since, because soon after leaving Saudi Arabia and deciding that it wasn't for me, I opened that booklet, and it dawned on me that actually the place I had visited was believed to be the final resting place of a maternal aunt of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which of course threw me, because I couldn't believe that one of the first generation of Muslims had made their way to Europe. And I wanted to understand why I didn't know that. And what followed was pretty much, first of all, a personal journey to try and explore the Islamic history and heritage of Europe, because I realized that this was being kept from me, or it was not visible, or it was not popular, whatever way you wish to discuss it. And there are various theories. And that journey, after being a personal journey of discovery, you know, myself and my family, every time we traveled in Europe, we would go and explore these things in some capacity. I realized that I needed to develop it into a professional journey as well. Because it soon dawned on me that, you know, there was all this history and heritage that I felt was mine. I had to access, because I was privileged enough to travel to these places, but most people had no access to, because nobody was telling them about it. It was not in their books, it was not in their curriculums, it was not in their histories, and it was not in their understanding of what made Europe Europe. But more worryingly, as a Muslim growing up in the West, in Europe, I realized that it was also playing a huge part in our sense of alienation and detachment from the concept of being European. And on the other hand, those who saw us as outsiders, as people that didn't belong, as Muslims I'm talking about here, it also lent itself to them and their arguments that Muslims were something new, something foreign, something alien to Europe. And it was easy for them to put those really, really pathetic narratives together, because nobody was there challenging these narratives. And what made me sad, of course, is most of this stuff is available in the academic arena. It's there, it's nothing new. Nobody is talking about something, you know, that I've magically conjured up and pulled out of a bag. It's always been there, but I didn't understand why it wasn't a part of the popular discussion and why it wasn't part of the popular narrative. And actually, when you look at it, it is a part of the narrative, but it's written in a particular perspective. And I guess a lot of my work ever since, you know, be it with the guidebooks for people like Lonely Planet, or in the case of the books and the radio I've done, and the various articles I've written in my career, most of it really is about kind of telling those stories as I'm going on these journeys, and just saying to people, actually, you know, it's quite interesting, and, you know, it might make you think a little bit. And so really that's what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing. Lots of stuff to dissect there. So first of all, Eastern Eye obviously was a Muslim newspaper.
No, not necessarily Muslim. It was a South Asian newspaper. It wasn't
Asian, but it was owned. I think it was owned by Muslims. The only reason I say that is
it was founded by a pair of Bangladeshi brothers, Muslim brothers, who lived very close to where I grew up. I remember their specific address as a young boy, because I knew exactly where they lived. But by the time I began working for Eastern Eye, it had been passed on several times, and it had ended up in the hands of Trinity Mirror Group. So at the time, it was actually part of the big Daily Mirror Group. Okay. You know, the ones who published the Daily Mirror. So at the time, it was part of a huge media establishment. and our owners were very much, just media individuals.
Yeah. The reason I said that, well, I didn't know this particular point, is because I worked for Asian Media Group, who actually acquired Eastern Eye. So I was actually a salesman getting people to advertise in Eastern Eye and the Gujarati newspapers as well. So that's why I actually know about Eastern Eye. So when you mentioned it, and when I joined their company, they told me the history that, it was founded by some Muslim guys.
That's right.
And, it was the biggest Asian newspaper, hence why Asian Media Group acquired it, because Asian Media Group was sort of the biggest sort of Asian, news station in the UK. So that's the first point. Second point, it's really inspiring how we don't know where, certain things in life are going to take us. You were going on holiday with your wife. You had a 9-hour gap where you stopped over in Greece or Cyprus and ended up visiting, this lake or this monument or this shrine. And it turns out to have such a, profound history within us, our religion. And now that led you to the path that you take. And, obviously as Muslims, we always believe that, qadr Allah ma sha fa'al, Allah, Allah's qadr will take you places, and you don't know where the khair and the barakah will come from. And subhanAllah, at the time, you didn't even think of it till you got home and read this booklet. And it turned out to be something that inspired the journey that you're on now. And that's really, really amazing. And obviously, like you said, so you're obviously someone who's fortunate, because obviously as people, we love to travel. So the fact that you do that for a living is amazing. So just a quick question for me personally, curiosity is overriding me here. So do you get sponsored to travel? So do you say to, I don't know if you work with like governments or whoever, and you say, look, I'm going to travel to like 1, 2, 3 places. I'm going to be there for a substantial amount of time. I need funding for that. Or is it that you fund yourself, and then obviously through the sales of your books, you recoup that money? Or do you have select investors that are private investors that, you raise money through to be able to do the work that you do? How do you do that?
Well, to be honest, travel writing, in terms of there are various ways that people do it. And in a way, the ones you've described, barring the kind of, I think you mentioned about private sponsors, barring that, it's probably a mix of the ones you've mentioned.
Okay.
So the main ways in which travel writers earn money are thus forth. Of course, when we start out and you are a nobody, you pretty much end up writing about your own journeys that you funded yourself, because you have to get published. It's a kind of, it's a cycle where if you aren't already published, people generally don't tend to commission you. So you first need to get the, bylines in. You have to get that work in. And so early on, most of my journeys, in fact, even the journey for the book right here behind me, Minarets in the Mountains, it was a journey I did myself, and off the back of it, I turned it into the book that it is. And it was very much the same with most of my early travel writing experiences, as I said, because it's very difficult to get that commission. So that's one way in which travel writers often write their work. And then you have the other option, of course, is that a publication or a media platform will commission you, and in which case they will give you a set fee. And of the back of that, some of the bigger ones might give you expenses to cover your travel costs as well. But this is increasingly rare because of just how poorly paid writing generally is. And with the kind of internet arriving and the competition, a lot of the traditional media brands just don't have those budgets anymore at all. Whereas historically, people would get huge budgets to travel, huge budgets to write the pieces. So that golden age is kind of gone. And then there's the one that you mentioned where tourist organizations, tourist boards and also various kind of large travel agencies may put together trips, and they invite writers like myself to go on there, and then when we do the trip, obviously they pay for everything, but they will probably lead you around to show you specific things because it's in their interest. If they're going to bring you over, they want to get what they want out of it. And then off the back of that, you go away and you then write for various publications. So for example, at the end of this month, I'll be heading out to Saudi Arabia, and this will be obviously something that the tourism board has put together. And then I'm going to come back and write for various publications about it. But, that's where they cover the costs for the journey. and then what the stuff I write off the back of it is my earning, you know. And then there's also things like when I used to do the guidebooks, you would get a set fee, you would go and do the research, you would do the write, and there would be one big fee in there, and off the back of that you would have to, you know, work out what you're going to spend on the road and what you're going to, you know, you would have to make your own budget from it. But they've obviously calculated whether, you know, how big that budget needs to be. So there are different ways, you know, that people can, and there are sponsored, you know, trips as well, where writers will go away having been sponsored to go and do it and then come back. But these don't tend to be, from my understanding and in my experience, they don't tend to be private businesses. They tend to be tourist boards, and businesses involved in travel and tourism. So yeah, there are a variety of ways. And as a freelancer, these are the different ways that I tend to function. Obviously, there are people who are paid staff for various media platforms and newspapers and magazines, and it's their day job. So they are getting paid a salary by their employer. And so how they go and travel could be any number of ways. But, you know, when they're doing that traveling, 9 times out of 10, their costs are covered either by their employer or by the people who are, you know, who want them to come out to these places.
Okay, that's amazing. And like you mentioned there, obviously you've got now the online space where you get bloggers and vloggers that, you know, and if you look at YouTube, I mean, you get a lot of people that, especially with food, very popular. They travel, they go to your country and they vlog the food element of what you can eat, how you can eat, and it's extremely popular. So, and as you mentioned, obviously, at the start, you made the joke about, you know, a book, you had to refer to books to go nowhere to travel to and stuff.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, in this day and age, although reading is very common, it's still something that maybe people are going away from. So being a writer yourself, what do you see the future of writing? How do you see the future of it? And how do you keep up with the competition of the vlogs, the blogs? Because someone has to buy your book to read it, right? So they're having to spend money to do that. Whereas if they want to, I don't know, find out about Saudi Arabia, they can go find some blogs online that are free, articles, find out what to do, how to do it, blah, 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 blah. I know you're focused very specifically on certain things like Muslim heritage and stuff like that within these areas. But how do you compete with these people, and how do you face this challenge and overcome it?
I mean, I don't personally try to compete because I know that, you know, this is the massive shift I've witnessed in my lifetime. You know, I was born before the internet, and so I've witnessed how the internet has completely revolutionized the world. And I think in, you know, years to come, if it's not already being spoken about in that way, we will speak about this as the information revolution. You know, the world will never be the same again. And I get that, but I think there will always be space for books. Now, that might be a digital form, and I spend enough time in literary circles, at literature festivals, to know that the passion and you know, desire to read books remains. I don't think we necessarily see as much of it within our own community, because I think the Muslim community, you know, especially in the West, I can only speak about my immediate community that I'm aware of, we aren't, say, as much of a literary community as maybe once upon a time. You know, so, but when we talk about the kind of wider population, whether it's in the UK or abroad, there's still a demand for books, because people understand that when you're reading that book, it's a deep dive and it's an experience that you can't mimic in any other way. So for some people it might be, oh, but you know, seeing a video, you really get to see it and that, but that's not why you're reading a book. You're reading a book because it doesn't assault you and your senses in the same way. You want some of it to be left to the imagination. You want to be away from electronic screen. You want to be, you know, holed up with just that book and have that kind of unplugged experience. And a lot of people still appreciate that. As with printed newspapers in the past, when this was a discussion about them, there may come a time where books become extremely niche, especially printed books. But I don't think long form reading, which is what books are essentially, is something that's going to disappear. And in terms of competing with the vloggers and the, you know, YouTubers and the influencers, I think we do very different things. You know, anybody who's read my book will appreciate that the level of research, the level of history, and the level of depth that I go to is something that is impossible for a vlogger to recreate in their kind of, you know, series or whatever. Maybe like a, I don't know, a 10-part documentary or something like that might come close. And that's the key difference, you know. And I think people who are interested in that are going to still buy this going forward. And in fact, every time I'm at one of these events, like I was at an event last night where it was just a small Eid event for TFL, and they'd invited me as their keynote speaker. And people are just like, what's the next one? You know, I want you to write more, because actually within our community, there is a hunger for this. Sometimes you don't know you want something unless somebody gives you it. You know, you don't even know it's there. And a lot of our people don't even know what travel writing is. They don't even know what kind of book this is, because I think the last guy to write something like this, who was a Muslim, died about 400 years ago. You know, the Ibn Battutas of the world, the Ibn Jubairs, the Awliya Chalabis. And so we don't have this tradition and culture, we don't have this literary tradition. And so when people read it for the first time, they're like, oh my God, I learned so much, and I went to these amazing places, and, you know, it wasn't boring. But yet when you talk about the history that I've put in there, or some of the narratives, if I was to just speak to you, it can come across like it's some dry historical book. But actually, when people read it, they realize the skill is in how you present that. Yeah. You know, it's got a lot of academic information in there, but it's not academic at all. You know, it's written for a popular market. And like I say, I think there is a space for that still amongst all the others. You know, I myself will sometimes just go and look at a YouTuber when I'm about to head somewhere, just to see some of the quick hits and whatever, or I might read, you know, those listicles, top 10 this, best places to do that. I mean, that's all it seems people write these days when it comes to, you know, travel articles. But I think there's a space for it all. And the space for this kind of writing, maybe it is shrinking, because increasingly we live in an age where things are churned over very quickly. People want the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And we're very kind of impatient, you know, and a lot of us don't have the patience to sit there with a book that might take you several hours to read. So yeah, I agree with you that it's not going to be as popular as it was once upon a time, but I believe it still has its place, its rightful place. And those that discover it, and what's been really beautiful, actually, if I may say so, is the sheer number of Muslims who admitted that they didn't read much and they hadn't finished a book until they picked up mine. And some people actually thanked me in their emails that I had reintroduced them to the love of reading a book. You know, and so even this is really wonderfully inspiring. And I'm not suggesting my book is suddenly going to make readers of all of us, but I think when you find a good book, it can bring you back to books as well. You know, and books don't have to be these physical things, as I say. Nowadays we have Kindles, we also have audiobooks, so there are other ways to consume it. But I think the people who know that if you really want to understand a topic, or if you want to understand something as significant as your heritage in the West, then you have to give it a bit more time than a YouTube video.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And again, mashallah, you got, you know, such insight. It's beautiful to listen to you speak. And you know, these podcasts, I usually have a format that I follow, and inshallah I'll come back to the format. But because I've got so much like interest around this topic, you know, I'm kind of diverting away from the usual format of my podcast, because I'm so intrigued to know, for example, obviously you've traveled to many places, alhamdulillah. What's the best sort of place that you've visited in terms of that was full of Muslim heritage that you didn't expect? So for example, for me personally, is when I went to Spain, when I was younger, it's filled with Muslim heritage. Obviously makes sense because of the Andalus Empire and whatnot. But that was for me like a revelation, like, wow, like, you know, so what about you?
Yeah, Spain had a similar effect on me. And, you know, shortly after coming back from Cyprus and living in the UK again, I used to go to Spain almost religiously. You could argue it became almost like a Western Muslims pilgrimage. You know, I would go to Cordoba and Granada every year, and sometimes I would drag different people along with me, but a lot of the time I would go on my own, because you know, I fell in love with this history and heritage, because it represented many things, but most significantly, I felt like as a Westerner, as a European, because I see myself with multiple identities. I'm not just saying I'm one of these, by the way. I very much see myself as a Bangladeshi. I see myself as a British person. I see myself as a Westerner, a European. All of these identities I feel comfortable wearing. We're often told we have to be one or the other. I don't believe that at all. So as a Westerner and as a European, I was like, this is my heritage. This is, wow, there were these great European Muslims like Ibn Rushd, and there were these great European Muslim Khalifs like Abdurrahman III, and what they achieved amazing things, and they built these stunning palaces, and actually they founded the European Renaissance, if you start looking into this. And so the more I explored this, in a way, that was going to Andalusia, so to speak, not Andalusia, Andalusia, but envisioning Al-Andalus was a very powerful and profound period in the journey that I was on. And I always thought that was going to be the book I was going to write. I thought I would end up writing about Al-Andalus. But of course, as you've made clear, we believe in Qadr, and clearly my destiny was not to write about Al-Andalus. And I think one of the reasons was Al-Andalus is very much seen as a dead Muslim history of Europe, okay? Because everybody was kicked out, including the Jews. They were all kicked out. And so that came to an end. And to write about that is to basically dream about what's been and gone. And this is something that is easy to dismiss by those who want to dismiss you as being European when you're a Muslim. So the reason I ended up writing about the Balkans is because the Balkans, right there, lying in our face, right in front of us, is the living indigenous European Muslim legacy. And nobody was writing about it in the popular domain in the way that, I wanted to write about it. And I realized that actually I needed to write about the living presence, because then nobody can say that, oh, yeah, European Islam is something that was here, but it's gone. No, it's not. It's still here. There are 3 countries that are Muslim European countries, but we don't talk about them in that way in the popular domain. And why don't we talk about it? And these are the things that I wanted to unpick. How comes everybody knows Albania is Muslim? Everybody knows Kosovo is Muslim. Everybody knows Bosnia is Muslim. But how comes nobody can say that there are European Muslim countries? How comes nobody can say there are indigenous European Muslims when throughout these regions that I've just explained, including Russia, which isn't covered in my book, but if you go as far east as Russia, there are Muslims who are through and through Europeans. They are indigenous Europeans, and therefore they are indigenous European Muslims. But why do we not talk about that? Why is that not a part of the discussion? Why are they seen as something separate from Europe? That's the kind of, issues that I wanted to unpick, but I also wanted to unpick it in not in an academic way. And that's why I wanted to take people on a journey, so that those who wanted to just come with me and see the Balkans did that. And those who wanted to come with me, see the Balkans and understand why Muslim Europe has been kept at arm's length and seen as something other than Western Europe, could also learn that along the way, But without a shadow of a doubt, I think, Andalusia had a profound impact on me. But most recently, it was the south of Thailand. When I was very lucky, I was sent to the south of Thailand by Lonely Planet after I said to them that I felt, I'm obviously one of their writers, so I made the point that I felt their coverage of Muslims in their guidebooks wasn't really great, is the best way to put it. And this is something I have to admire about Lonely Planet. They're very receptive when I speak to them about these things, and they said, "Great, why don't you go and do it?" And I was like, "Fantastic, let me do that." So I went down to the south, and I pointed out that prior to working on the most recent guidebook, pretty much the most popular image of the Muslims of Thailand these were people who had issues with the central government, and there was insurgencies, and there was a lot of kind of terrorism going on in the south, and maybe it was an area to avoid. And my experience of Muslim Thailand was the complete opposite. It was this beautiful, rich Southeast Asian Muslim culture that we knew almost nothing about. It was just as beautiful as the Buddhist culture. The food was just as tasty as what we perceive as being, regular Thai food. And I wanted to bring all that to the fore. I wanted to show them the kind of unique architecture of the mosques. I wanted to show them the unique culture of the Muslim Thais. And when I went there, I was, just as when we first went to Andalusia, just completely blown away that there's all this Muslim heritage and history and culture in our faces. But one of the reasons, and this is really, really important, one of the reasons that it hasn't been spoken about, hasn't been written about, is because the people who normally write about it in the English language aren't interested in it, or their radar isn't switched on, or they're just ignorant of it. Because you have to remember that the genre I'm writing in was historically the preserve and the domain of the white middle class non-Muslim male. Okay, and if we go back a bit, then it was obviously someone from the colonial class. So it gets even worse the further we go back in history as to who's writing these things. And so when these things were written historically, whether it's about the Balkans or whether it's written about, you know, in this case, southern Thailand or whatever, it's being written by people who saw Islam as something other from themselves and didn't see it as their own history and heritage. So when you have a white European traveling to the Balkans and exploring the Muslim heritage of that space, they don't see it as theirs. I saw it as mine. And that's the key difference. And when I write about it, I'm celebrating it. That's not to say that Muslims didn't do awful things in these places as well. Let's be clear about that. I don't wish to romanticize any of this, because I think that's also a problem, you know, on both sides. You know, the Ottomans did some awful things, but also I wanted to celebrate the fact that because of the Ottomans, there was this amazing Muslim legacy still there. I wanted to go and show people the stunning food of the Bosnians. I wanted to show them the amazing buildings that Mimar Sinan built that we don't even know about. You know, I wanted to do all of this, and because I saw it as my heritage, that's what I was excited about. Whereas somebody who goes there and doesn't see it as their heritage, they're focusing on other things, and they're seeing this as the invader's heritage, as the foreigner's heritage, as the other heritage. And that's one of the reasons why the way things have been written in the English language have left us, obviously, at a loss.
Amazing. Again, bro, I could listen to you speak all day, because you've hit on a couple of points there that, you know, it shifts the way that the mind can think. So obviously, because you mentioned 3 European countries that are Muslim, but obviously straight away I was like, wait, hold on, but Turkey's, you know, sort of a European and Asian, but European country. And then I was like, wait, hold on, but you're talking about how did you say
Indigenous,
which basically means the traditional Europeans that are originally
people who are from that land that you can't deny.
Exactly. Whereas obviously Turks can fall in between. You know, I know they're seen as European.
And also, you know, the EU has a real issue. Members of the EU have a real issue with even considering Turkey for various reasons, which we can go into. And there is obviously a part of Turkey that is said to be in Europe, but it's only a tiny segment compared to the rest of Turkey. Turks might consider themselves Europeans. I might consider themselves European. But to make my argument, the 3 countries I gave you are geographically in what universally is accepted as Europe.
Exactly.
Except it's qualified as Eastern Europe.
Yes.
Exactly. And that is the key. That is one of the primary tools and one of the primary devices that helps to distance it and put it over there. So there's Europe proper, Western Europe, and then there's Eastern Europe. And Eastern carries lots of connotations. It means the East, which can be both exotic in the Orientalist vision, but can also be barbaric in the Orientalist vision. And that's why it's still to this day defined as Eastern Europe. And a lot of people will say, oh, this is because it was under communism and there was the, you know, Iron Wall and all of that. Communism was 40 years. It was being treated like this for 6 centuries before, when it was Muslim Europe. And that's, for me, is the real reason why it's kept at arm's length. What's interesting is when you look at the countries I'm talking about, if they are here, there's a country over here that we don't consider as Eastern Europe. We never qualify it as Eastern Europe because this is Greece. And we want all of Greece's heritage to be considered Western Europe. So we don't call Plato an Eastern European. We don't call Aristotle an Eastern European. We don't call Hippocrates an Eastern European, because they are seen as the bedrock of Western European civilization. So this is about narratives. This is about rhetoric. This is about how you tell the story. And because we haven't been telling the story in most spaces, Muslims are the other. And so, you know, in the English language, I must qualify that. You know, if we look at Turkish literature, there is plenty of work being done on this by Turks who are writing about this, because they've always seen it as their heritage, as the kind of, you know, legacy of the Ottomans. They have always seen it as their heritage, be it because it was the Ottomans or be it because it was Turks or whatever. But in the English language, which is arguably the most powerful language today, you know, it's not like that. And that's part of the well, not part of, that is the key issue.
And that is very true. I mean, even just saying it the way you just did with obviously Greece, and it's all about narratives, as you said, because there are certain things that when I think about, like I will think of Greece, and obviously this is all, relative to what you're fed in the media and what you're told growing up and stuff like that. And it's funny because obviously when I visited Greece or Cyprus as a Palestinian, they're just across the sea from us, right? And culturally, in terms of the way the people look, the way they carry themselves, their food, their roads, the streets, the country, the land is literally like a mirror image to us. The only difference is obviously their faith is more, towards Christianity, whereas we're Muslim. But when I was there, I literally felt like I was at home. It's crazy. And when I speak to Greek people, whether it was at university or my friends or whatever, we have that sort of, the cultural connection is very similar. The way that we care for certain things, the way that we're, emotional about certain things, hot-headed in certain areas, it's all very similar. And also there was something, and I don't know about the viewers, I'm sure they're learning just as much as I am. The fact that you mentioned South Thailand, right? When I think of Thailand, the last thing I would think is that there's any Muslim heritage in Thailand, right? But that would make sense that there is, because obviously if you look at Malaysia, if you look at Indonesia, they're all within the same sort of region, and they're all Muslim. So obviously that would make perfect sense that obviously the southern of Thailand would have a Muslim heritage. But I'm just learning that as we speak in here, and now it's given me this sort of motivation to be someone who travels there now, just to go and see the Muslim heritage there. Because, for example, when I went to Malaysia, when I went there, obviously we experienced the whole Buddhist, because obviously Malaysia is a country that is predominantly Muslim, but it has a 50%, which is the Chinese Buddhist, and there's an element of Hinduism as well. So when I was there, I was going to see all their temples and seeing how the culture sort of allows the Muslim heritage and the Muslims to live, but also amongst Malaysians, you obviously have the Chinese Malay and the Hindu Malay who practice their own religion. And it was a really bizarre experience where I was like going to all these Buddhist temples and have these big idols and all of these statues. And it was really sort of, it was just an amazing experience to be able to experience that and experience the Islam, because the masajid there, just as beautiful as the mosques, they have their temples as well. And all the temples there, I felt what I felt as a tourist when I was there. There is respect, the Muslims respect the Hindus respect the Buddhists respect the Muslims. Obviously, within the culture, there's going to be the clashes. Obviously, you're a Chinese Malay, I'm a Malay, you're a Hindu Malay or an Indian Malay, and there's the sort of the differences within the cultures. But it was really beautiful. So you obviously talking about South Thailand is giving me this inspiration to go there. I do just want to touch on some things now, just away from your work a little bit.
Sure.
To find out a little bit about Tharik growing up in East London. Obviously, for those that don't know, in case we have viewers that are from outside of the UK, obviously the East End of London has always been known to be a rough area of London, especially in the time that you were raised there. I'm guessing because of the timeline that we talked about here, that you were working during 9/11, so that means you were of a certain age. So that means you were raised in probably, I'd say, the 80s of the East End, which is, that means that, that era in the East End is just after, for obviously I'm going to give people some bit of history. The Cray twins and stuff like that are just coming out of that era, and then you've got, the East End gangsters. And as a young Muslim growing up in that era, obviously being a Londoner, I know how much the Asian audience in that area had to fight and had to go through. And obviously being so heavily populated, right? So obviously you guys didn't come in small numbers, you came in large numbers. So all of a sudden, the East End of London was now split between the whites and the Asians. Obviously you had other cultures there, but they came a little bit later on. So what was it like growing up in the West, in the East End of London, but in the West, as a young Muslim of color, of Bangladeshi roots, especially coming as a immigrant yourself, not being a first generation born here, but being first generation refugee? What was that all like for you?
Yeah, it was a quite a tough time in many ways, because of course, as you pointed out, we were seen as the most recent invaders to turn up. You see, the East End of London has a very, very distinct character and personality, because it's historically been where many, many immigrants have arrived over the years, over the centuries. So, you can go all the way back to the Jews that escaped the French persecution. and bring it all the way up to, you know, the Irish, the Maltese, and then of course the Bangladeshis that came along with my father's generation. And as you say, it led to the marginalization of the local white East End community, which was not necessarily just, you know, your typical English as in Anglo-Saxon. We're talking Irish, we're talking Maltese, all of these who fell into that broader term of white began to see themselves as being marginalized, and began to feel threatened, began to feel like their identities and their spaces were being threatened. And inevitably there was a clash. It was also very, very popular with the British National Party, which, you know, your viewers will know is effectively a political fascist movement. But in those days, it was successful enough and had enough empathy in the area to actually be, the East End became one of the only two places in the whole country that ever elected a BNP councillor. And this was on the Isle of Dogs in Tower Hamlets, which is where today Canary Wharf and the business district sits. And the Isle of Dogs is where they were successfully able to elect someone. And that I think the fact that they were able to elect someone tells you how much sympathy and empathy they had within the communities there. And that was apparent to me growing up, because I experienced many attacks. I witnessed many attacks. You know, my own family was attacked. My father was, in fact, in the book, I talk about my father being attacked on our doorstep. I talk about myself witnessing a pair of Nazis splitting open the cheek of of an older friend in front of my eyes. So it was a very, very tough time. And there are remnants of this history that people can go and see. You know, anybody who knows the Brick Lane area will know that at one end of Brick Lane is Al-Tabali Park, which is a park named after effectively a Bangladeshi martyr, because Al-Tabali was of my father's generation of men. And in 1978, he was brutally murdered there by a bunch of racists. And that murder kind of instigated the fight back that, first of all, was led by my father's generation of young single men when they were here. And then when they brought their families over, there was a fight that many of my generation took up and continued until we firmly established our presence there. But, you know, I also grew up witnessing the BNP marching through Brick Lane, you know, as a kind of demonstration of their power and desire to not let that place go. So growing up in the East End was tough in that respect. But as you said, the British Bangladeshi community arrived in large numbers, you know, and I don't think this was necessarily by design. This was something, you know, this was a policy that the UK government and at the time the London councils had, where they would lump us all together. And they would lump us all together in the crappiest parts and the cheapest parts and the places where nobody else wanted to live. In fact, I remember when I was doing my research on the East End many years ago, that it said that in the Time Out guide to London in the 1980s, it was a place taxi drivers refused to stop, because they just did not expect to have a nice experience, and they normally didn't have their fares paid. This was long before Uber, where you didn't have a choice. You know, you had to actually hand over cash, and apparently most people would just disappear without paying it. So this was a grim place, you know, and even before we came along, it was a grim place. I used to walk, my memories of walking through Brick Lane are kind of corrugated tin covering most of the spaces and the shops, and, you know, weeds growing out of bombed out buildings. It was an absolute shithole, as someone might put it. Whereas today, of course, it's the trendiest and most desirable place for hipsters to live. Okay, so we witnessed that shift. But because we were in large numbers, we also developed a very, very tight-knit community. You know, the people I grew up with on the housing estates, not just the British Bangladeshis, but also any other ethnic groups that found themselves mixed in with us. So, you know, there were a handful of Indians, Pakistanis, even the odd Palestinian had made their way there, you know. We all grew up as though we were part of one village. And that kind of, at the time, I didn't realize, you know, now I look back and I realize that that was a beautiful thing that many people have never experienced either. It's akin to the way we were used to living maybe in Bangladesh, where everybody knew everybody. Everybody saw each other as uncles and aunts and brothers and sisters. And to this day, when I go back to my old masjid for the odd Eid gathering, or sorry, the odd Ramadan iftar, you know, I see people who treated me like their little brother, who even put their own safety at risk to defend me if we were ever under attack. And you know, that kind of solidarity and that kinship that we had was something magical and beautiful. It was out of necessity in many ways, because you know, we were under siege. We knew that people outside wanted to hurt us or kill us, and so you know, in those communities, in those housing estates, people became extremely close. And also, as first generation migrants, our parents, you know, they were lonely, they were isolated, and so they made connections with those people in order to you know, stave off that isolation and to connect. And because a lot of these people were from that very concentrated part of Bangladesh, actually a lot of us did have existing kinship. That so when we arrived, you know, I had uncles and aunts that lived relatively close by, you know, and so the community was tight, the community was hardworking, and you can see the fruits of that today, because if you go to the East End of London, as you know only too well, most of the businesses are run by British Bangladeshis, most of the very wealthy individuals in the area are British Bangladeshis, most of the politicians are British Bangladeshis, and that came from hard work. You know, that came from hard work. And yeah.
I completely agree. When I visit East London, one of the things that I really appreciate about that end is exactly what you've just said, and what you've described is there's a real sense of a community there. You know, in comparison to other areas, obviously you get the community sense in other areas as well. Like if you go North London, got a large Caribbean society or a Turkish society. South London, you've got Afro-Caribbean. You know, West London, you've got a lot of the Arab community, or the Gujarati community, or the Indian community. So there are communities everywhere you go. But because of what you said in terms of the experiences that you'd have had to go through in the East End, obviously it was a life or death. You know, obviously in other areas like South London, there was a lot of poverty. So you had a sense of community because of the poverty. But like you just said, you were actually experiencing firsthand racism that could lead to your life actually being taken just because someone didn't like the color of your skin, or the food that you're making, or whatever. So, but what I want to focus on as well, obviously, because there was such a large community there, obviously you guys would have built mosques pretty quickly, right? And how did that impact your religion, obviously growing up in the West? Did you ever, you know, not necessarily falter away from the religion, but growing up as a Muslim, because of that community that you had, everyone around you is Muslim, did that help you kind of stay steadfast upon your religion? Or growing up in the West, did you have that sort of impact of, you know, an identity crisis, let's say, of am I a Muslim? Should I be a practicing Muslim or whatnot? So how was that sort of, just from an Islamic?
I think we had all of that and some. You know, as a migrant community, we obviously had an identity crisis. That's inevitable. You know, you have a first generation of parents who have a particular idea of how you should be raised, and that is obviously shaped by their own experience in a foreign country now, in a country that is far from the UK and is very, very different to anything that we were witnessing there and then. And so obviously, to then see how we were turning out created a tension and created a conflict. And yet at the same time, they managed to establish a lot of the infrastructure that would still give us a good grounding in Islam. It would give us a good grounding in our sense of identity as Muslims. But inevitably, we were now in a society where we were exposed to many, many influences that hitherto our parents had never experienced. So they didn't know how to cope with that. And that's everything from, you know, being far more, what's the word, like experiencing, you know, the ability to go out and eat what you want, drink what you want, you know, engage in recreational drugs, and live in a far more hedonist lifestyle, you know, is probably the best way to put it, where, you know, you were able to date women, you were able to, all of these things prior to coming to this country, our parents had never experienced, because they were people from a particular place where society just didn't function like that. So to suddenly so to suddenly have to, cope with that created inevitable challenges for them. And we saw lots of push and pull moments, and one of the darkest phases for us, something that we're still recovering from as a community, was the impact of mass availability of drugs. And I'm talking about really, really high level of drugs, A-class drugs. As a young man, I lost many people to heroin and heroin addiction. In fact, many people in my community to this day are still only just beginning to recover and come out of that. So that's just an extreme example of one of the influences that suddenly came, and we as a community just simply did not have the infrastructure or the faculties or the capacity to cope with that. We didn't even know what it was, and it was suddenly in our community, and young men that I was hanging around with were using it, selling it, making money from it, and so on. So to have all of that produced challenges that we'd never experienced, and it made it very, very difficult to be, as you might say, quote unquote, a practicing Muslim. And yet we had madrasas set up, and yet we had, huge masajids being founded. And of course, when you're very young, your parents are pulling you to the mosque. And then as you get older, you're running to the mosque as you begin to establish and find out the real reason mosques are built. And it's not just to go and pray, that it's where the community is, it's where, it's where the hub of your people are. It's a space that is more than just for you to go and bow every day. So these things take time, but also it takes time for us to find our feet as British Bangladeshis. This was an identity that didn't exist. We needed to understand, what does that mean? Some of us are still working it out, and we've turned out in different ways. Some people have really, really held on to their Bangladeshi identity. And then you come to the other end where you find people who just see Bangladeshi, their Bangladeshiness as something that is quite separate from who they are, and it's something in the past, and everything in between. And it takes a long time for any community to work that out. And we see that with all communities that migrate en masse to another place. Being a Palestinian, I don't need to tell you that. It's something your community has experienced everywhere. So yeah, it did produce a lot of challenges, but we were a strong and large community that also put in a lot of infrastructure. And I think the most iconic and emblematic example of that would probably be the East London Mosque. Although my father's generation were not necessarily the founders, they certainly inherited it. I mean, the mosque has a very fascinating history that I wasn't privy to when I was young, but it was largely the Bangladeshi community that inherited it when it made its way over to Whitechapel from near what is now the Blackwall Tunnel. Sorry, not the A13. And when it made its way over, it was largely inherited by the local Bangladeshi community, who, quote unquote, took it to the next level, if you will. And you can see that it's probably the most influential mosque in the country, if not one of the most influential mosques in Europe. And that's something that, as a community, we're very proud of. And it's far more inclusive now. It's not seen as a Bangladeshi mosque anymore. And that in itself, after a while, became problematic for people, of course. But alhamdulillah, it's very inclusive, very open now. And for me, it's a wonderful legacy, and my father's generation's role in that will never be forgotten. And it's something we can be extremely proud of. So yes, we have the infrastructure, we had the infrastructure put in place, that those of us that wanted to really embrace our Islamic identity, we were able to do so, even though we had to also unpick what that meant.
MashaAllah, alhamdulillah. And actually, yeah, Islam, the masjid obviously is very, very famous in the UK for what it does. And alhamdulillah, I know many people that, I have friends from East London that, speak very highly of it. I was actually going to go there for some Ramadan prayers this year, but didn't end up going around to it. So inshallah, next year I will try my best to be there. So very quickly, what did you, aspire to be when you were younger? Obviously, you've done journalism. Was that something that you always aspired to be when you were younger? Or?
No, I wanted to be a footballer, bro. When I was young, that was my first love, after my mother, it was football I loved the most. Wow. And no, I actually played football to quite a relatively high and serious level. I played up to a semi-professional level in this country, But, that came with its own challenges. You just have to look at the Premier League and wonder why there are no South Asians playing in the forefront of I think there's only Hamza Chowdhury, who is half Sylheti Bangladeshi and half I think he's Grenadian, black Grenadian. So that has challenges as well, and those are the challenges that I experienced first when I first tried to carve out a career in something I loved. But I always loved writing. I always loved reading, so I wanted to do that. And teaching came naturally to me as well, because I used to do a lot of youth work when I was younger. But yeah, to answer the question simply, like many young boys, I wanted to be a footballer. I wanted to play in the Premier League. Well, it wasn't there when I started out, but I wanted to play in the World Cup. I wanted to travel the world and kick footballs. So that was my first love.
What position did you play?
Central midfield.
MashaAllah.
So I played in that kind of little pocket behind the strikers, because I'm not very tall or very big, so I had to rely on my brains rather than the muscle and speed, which is what most English football clubs want, and that was probably another reason why it was a challenge to try and sort of break through in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned that. Obviously, and you've already hit the nail on the head. We don't really see many South Asians or Asian, footballers, and it's, that stereotype. Obviously, the views, how they're viewed. I remember one time actually, we had the trials for a club, and the best player on the pitch was Asian, and he didn't get picked. And he was by far the best, and for whatever reason, there was no logical reason to it, but he just didn't get picked. Whether it's that stereotype or people just tend to not view, as good as you may look, you just don't end up being viewed that you're that good, or whatever reason it is, SubhanAllah. Yeah. Quick question, so you're a West Ham fan, seeing as you're from...
No, not at all. My father arrived in the 70s and 80s, looked at the top of the league, saw Liverpool, and passed that on to me.
Good man. Never walk alone. I'm a Liverpool man myself, mate. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So obviously, given that your work, would you say that you're a business owner, a freelancer, or an employee? Because then I can ask, my next question.
Yeah, no, to be honest, I wish I was a business owner. I'd be probably making a lot more money. No, I'm just a freelance writer, is probably the best way to describe it.
So what's your biggest achievement in your career, let's say, obviously?
From the writing perspective as a career, I probably would say, the fact that this book ended up getting longlisted and shortlisted for 2 of the biggest literary prizes in this country.
MashaAllah.
Thank you.
Very good. When are the awards for that?
No, they were done, been and gone. So it didn't win, but the fact that it was longlisted and shortlisted for 2 of the biggest literary prizes is a huge achievement for a debut book.
Yeah, 100%. And just to give the viewers some insight, obviously making the shortlist, out of how many did it get shortlisted out of?
So we don't know the numbers, but it basically meant that this was one of the top 10 non-fiction books last year, and it ended up being one of the top 5, one of the top 5 travel books this year, because it was shortlisted for the Stamford Dolman Travel Awards, and it was longlisted for the Bailey Gifford Prize in non-fiction.
That is absolutely incredible, bro. Absolutely amazing achievement. MashaAllah, as we say in Arabic. So this leads me to my next question really well. What was your biggest challenge? So obviously this is your biggest achievement. What was your biggest challenge, or if you want to call it a lesson along the journey?
I think my biggest challenge in this field, from a practical perspective, it would be finance. This writing does not reward very well. Nobody wants to pay for writing anymore because the internet has made literature so widely available that everybody thinks, well, you can just get this stuff anywhere. Everyone just thinks, why should I pay for something I can get freely? So getting paid for this is tough. But as a family man, one of the other practical challenge has been to try and carve out a career in a field that doesn't financially reward very much and does involve traveling a lot. That can be quite challenging, and so to juggle all of that has been quite tough. But also to try and enter a field where there are no real people like me already there is very, very difficult, because as with the football scenario, you are trying to convince people that you can do something that they've never seen people like you do before.
Very deep.
Yeah, and that's really, really tough. And so even with this book, trying to get a deal for it was very difficult for me early on. And eventually it was a very small, tiny publisher that actually took a punt, shall we say, and agreed to publish the book, and it's been so successful that ironically some of the publishers who turned me down are now asking my new agent why I didn't offer the book to them initially. And of course my agent is making it quite clear to them that I did, and they said no for various reasons. But at the time I was a nobody, and when my book landed, I wanted to write about travel. I wanted to write about traveling with a family, and I wanted to write about exploring Muslim heritage. None of those things were done by the traditional travel writers who tended to be white and middle class men. So it was, yeah.
And obviously just even you saying that sentence, I can just imagine now, because I've had experience with publishers and publications, because my mum's an author as well. And I'm actually entering that industry. I was so overwhelmed by how it works and the percentages, and it's a very, considering that it's a space where obviously I know there are a lot of authors, but reading and writing books is something that should be treasured, right? Not anybody can do it. And although there are many authors, it doesn't mean that everyone's of a certain quality, right? And considering that how publications tend to treat authors and how they go about it is obviously they make it harder. As hard as it is already, they make it a lot harder. But what you've just said there, imagine that. So publishers don't know you, and you're coming to them saying that you want to write about Muslim heritage, traveling the world, talking about something that's related to a religion that is frowned upon from a lot of people. So if you go into big publications that aren't Muslim, they're going to look at you and be like, well, why would we even look into that? It's not going to feed our audience. It's not something that we want to even support. So you're wasting your time here. And then all of a sudden now, it's that whole thing when you get a name for yourself, you get recognized, all of a sudden, those same people that would have never supported you at the start now come calling for you and, want to show you the love and support and whatnot. Yeah. So very quickly, what's one advice you would give to 20-year-old Tharik? So if you could just give Tharik a call, he's 20 years old right now, and you just were able to give him one piece of advice, what would that be and what would that look like?
That's a very interesting question, because in spite of all the challenges I've had and the way that it's come about, because we believe every decision was meant to be, and we believe that every decision was the right decision, and Allah did it all for specific reasons that you don't always understand. I've made peace with all the decisions. Maybe I would have said to him, don't bother with the football. Don't waste so much time on that. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I became a father very young. And that produced lots of challenges for the careers that I wanted to chase. But I would never go back and say, don't have kids that young, because I've had such an amazing, fatherhood, and my children are amazing individuals. And I know, had I not become a father, there were certain aspects of my personality, character, and development that wouldn't have taken place. So like I say, I believe everything Allah put me through, he did it to make me who I am today. So that if I gave that 20-year-old Tharik some advice and he took it, it wouldn't be the same Tharik sitting here today.
I agree with that. Okay, and because usually I would ask this question regarding business, but obviously, as you said, you're a freelancer. So what's one sort of career tip or a freelancer tip, if you want to make it relevant to freelancers, because obviously there are a lot of freelancers these days,
yes.
graphic design and whatnot. So what's sort of one tip you would give that sort of person, a freelancer or someone who's looking to do what you do?
Yeah, I do have some practical advice for them, actually, because I think a lot of freelancers, when they're trying to sort of break through the glass ceiling, or trying to take that next step, whatever that is in their career. In my case, it was writing that book. For other people, it may be something else. I would say if you're really struggling and you're bashing your head against the wall and you're not sure how to go, seek out a professional mentor. That was one of the most practically powerful things I did. Seek out a professional mentor and invest in it. Don't just go looking for someone free, okay? Because when you try it, when you want something for free, it comes to you for free as well. You know, the person who's giving you it also knows they're doing it for free, and consciously or unconsciously, their heart isn't going to be in it in the same way. You know, see it as an investment in your career. You won't see the results straight away. Pay for that mentoring, pay for that time. And if you're willing to do that, you will be able to find a professional mentor much quicker. Whereas if you're going around looking and hoping that your uncle will know someone or your dad will know someone, it will take forever. Go to professional bodies that are in your field, go and find a mentor and ask them to guide you to take that next step.
MashaAllah. I mean, I couldn't support that anymore myself. You know, mentorship is so important. Absolutely. If we make it relatable to football, at football you have a football coach. Without a football coach, you don't get any better. Teaching, if you're going to university, you have a teacher, a mentor, a person to guide you. Absolutely. When you're in college, you have someone who's a career guider, or career guide who tells you where to go and where to utilize your skills.
And in Islam, we always had a sheikh.
And in Islam, you have a sheikh, an imam. So exactly, you always have that mentor when you're even within a family. If you're a younger brother, you look up to your older brother, and vice. You know, it's the same thing. So I completely support that. Obviously, being a leadership coach myself or a business consultant, I would always obviously advocate for this. But me myself, I have coaches, right? Yeah. For gym, you have a personal trainer. So why would you not invest money and time into this for your professional space? And
I think that's a really difficult thing. Sorry to cut you off, Osama. It's a really difficult thing for people who are freelancers, because we have no community, no professional working community. You understand? Because we're often like, we go and work for them, and 9 times out of 10, it might just be somebody at the end of an email. So we don't have a professional working community where we might look around and think, you know what, if I go and speak to blah, blah, he'll tell me how he or she got to that point. We don't have that. So it takes a little bit of thinking out of the box. Let me go and find a professional mentor that can help me take the next step. You know, if I was to, earlier you said looking back as a 20-year-old, you know, if I was to go back to me as a 16-year-old trying to make it in football, that's one of the things I would say. You know, go and find someone who can take you abroad and do trials in countries that were more conducive to your style and whatever else, because I found out only too late that I might have made it professionally somewhere else. So this is the kind of thing. When we're trying to enter these arenas where we don't have role models, we often don't know how to navigate them. And that's where a mentor is immense.
You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, I couldn't agree anymore. And especially within the freelance space, I see a lot of my friends in there and people that I, you know, especially with the online platforms like Fiverr and Upwork and all of the other, there's so much competition. So the only way you can get ahead of that competition is going with someone who's been there, done that, and can show you, listen, just do 1, 2, 3 consistently, and you can land your clients. So Jazakallah khair for that tip. So very quickly, away from all of this, many people have morning or evening routines. And I want to ask you, obviously, someone that works for yourself or as a freelancer, obviously you're a travel writer, so maybe it's a bit more difficult to sort of juggle this. Do you have a routine, a morning routine, evening routine, a midday routine maybe, that just allows you to start your day a certain way or end your day a certain way?
I don't really have a routine, but I'm somebody who finds that I actually work better later in the day. Okay. So I tend to struggle in the morning. So I won't do as much in the mornings. You know, it's a slower start for me, but I really start to get right into my writing in the evenings. So it's the opposite. I kind of tend to burn the candle at that end rather than this end. You know, I'm quite I like to sleep, so I tend to get up quite late, you know, and my writing is really something that I enjoy doing the later the day goes, because the more I'm awake, the more I find myself immersed in it. But one of the things that I do really enjoy is I find that after I write lengthy pieces, I like to reflect on them, and I like to reflect on them while cycling. So this is one of the things that I really enjoy, largely because when I'm cycling, I resist any attempt to look at my phone or engage with that horrible device that's always taking our attention. And as I'm cycling, you know, I'm reading things over in my head, I'm rewriting things. And I firmly believe that it's that combination of, you know, fresh air and obviously all the wonderful chemicals that are released from exercise that really help with that process. and so I often find, and I tend to cycle in more rural areas. I don't do road cycling. I tend to cycle down canals and, country lanes and stuff. So there's a lot of fresh air in those areas. And so that's something that I really do enjoy when after I've written a piece that I need to think about more, that I need to edit, obviously at some point, I tend to reflect on it whilst doing exercise. Cycling is the exercise that I enjoy.
And that's amazing that you managed to link that back to health, which is obviously exercise is a form of looking after your health. And as many people will tell you, like for example, for me, when I go on long walks, I like to, sometimes I don't take my phone, I just go with myself and my thoughts.
Yes.
Because it allows that, like you said, you get away from that, you have time to think. And the best ideas sometimes are when you're on these things, whether it's cycling, whether it's on the walk, because you're adding an element of exercise to the element of nature, to the element of allowing your thoughts to just work. Even if all your thoughts that come are wrong thoughts or whatever, they're not necessarily productive thoughts, but you're getting that out of the way. So even sometimes when
you have to process
shower, after you come home, you shower, you sat down, all of a sudden you just get this big rush of like, oh my God, I need to do this and this and this and this. Oh, and you don't go to sleep because you've got that rush. So that's really amazing. And I just want to end on here today. It's been amazing having you on. And we're going to do a quick fire round after this final question.
Yeah.
But I've received a ton of value from you already today, but I want to end it on this. What's one piece of value, one thing that you would like to leave myself and the viewers with that's from Tharik, that's one piece of value from you?
I think the one piece of value I would give is, nothing is as it seems. And what I mean by that, of course, is, you've only got to look at the work I'm trying to do. And there is so much work to be done out there that has been ignored for all of this time, all this Muslim heritage, all this history of ours that is right there in front of us. And I dare say that in every field, it's the same. So there's opportunities in every field if you just think out of the box and look at things from a different perspective, because that's all I was doing. I was looking at it and I was realizing, this is my history and I can write about this if nobody else wants to write about it. And I can actually bring this to the surface and, just be brave enough to then do it.
Amazing advice. And I absolutely love it. I was just literally speaking to my wife the other day about this. And, I was saying, and not necessarily within this sort of space, but when, we have our thoughts always cloud our judgment and make us think things are worse or bigger than they are. And I always say, like you said, nothing is what it seems. So even just a simple exercise to help you with this is get a pen and paper and just write down your thoughts. And all of a sudden you list everything in front of you, like, oh wait, that's not that deep, that's not that deep, that's not that deep, that's not that important.
Yeah, exactly.
I might stress it out. So completely agree. And also using it in a more practical sense with what you've just said, when it comes to business, when it comes to freelance work, when it comes to your career, go and speak to that manager if you want the promotion. It's in your head. You're the one that's having that fear of what if they say no? What if they sack me? What if they say, wait, why do you deserve it? You don't know. So nothing is as it seems. Go and speak to them. They might give you the promotion. They might give you that pay rise. Start that business. Your friends might support you more than you think and buy your products. Write that book. Do that work, whatever it is.
Exactly.
So, before we go into the quick fire round, would you like to promote your book whilst you're here?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's right here. It's called Minarets in the Mountains, A Journey into Muslim Europe. It's available in every bookshop. And of course, you can buy it online in all the various kind of avenues. You can also order it directly from me from my website at tharikhussain.co.uk, where I'm selling signed copies if you want to have them sent to somebody for Eid or something like that. But yeah, grab it, have a read, let me know what you think.
Very nice, very nice. Actually, quick question. I didn't ask it before, but how long did it take you to write that book?
Oh, so it took quite a long time, just purely because obviously it was a process dragged out by doubt and whatever else. But if I add it all up, I would say the journey itself took about 6 weeks. We traveled through the Balkans for 6 weeks as a family. And then I would say the drafting process plus the redrafting process, probably a year and some after that. Yeah.
Very nice.
So it took, but of course in that time there's lots of research and everything going on as well.
And this just goes to show people that things don't happen overnight. It takes a lot of work, sleepless nights, dedication, work rate, consistency, doubts, as you said, overcoming certain things. and in the end, you have a very beautiful product to show for it. So without further ado, inshallah, let's jump into the quick fire round questions. Burger or pizza?
Burger.
Burger. Okay, good. Do you put your socks on after or before your trousers when you're getting ready?
Before.
Before, okay. Do you brush your teeth before?
By the way, that before one, that's with age.
So maybe in a couple of years I'll get there where the socks.
When I was younger, it was the other way around. Now that I'm struggling to bend down to do things, I think I tend to put the socks on before to avoid the hassle.
That's good. Do you brush your teeth before or after breakfast?
After.
After breakfast. Okay, cool. Are you?
No. Sorry. Before. Yeah. Sorry,
before breakfast.
Yeah. I've always done that. Yeah.
Okay, before breakfast. So you brush your teeth, then you have breakfast. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's right.
Obviously, I don't know how much time you have for movies and series, but which do you prefer, movies or series? Are you do you lean towards?
Series.
Series. What's your favorite series?
Oh, that's a tough one. I actually watched Leonardo recently.
Okay.
Which is the one about the life of Leonardo da Vinci that's been dramatized. That was pretty good. Before that, it's an old one, but I really liked the one about Marco Polo. And then there was the Ottoman series. So as you can see, I tend to go for these historical dramatizations. I'm not going to throw Ertugrul in there because that's a whole other discussion. But
sorry, quickly, the Ottoman series is the one that they done over 6 episodes. Where it was like a docu-series. Yeah.
That's right.
It was about the Muhammad.
That was about the fall of Constantinople.
Amazing series. Anyone that hasn't watched it, I highly recommend that series. Amazing series.
That's really, really good.
Yeah, really good one. Okay, personal development or novels in terms of books?
Neither. I'm more non-fiction.
Non-fiction.
I don't really read novels. My wife is the novel reader, so everything behind me is non-fiction. All the novels are in her shelves. And actually, I've never really, the only self-help books I did read was on how to, market a book, how to become a writer. That's the only time I approach those books.
And that would make perfect sense because that's what you do. So that's absolutely, and because of those books, I'm sure they had the helping hand in making you who you are. So anyone out there that doesn't read any personal development books, they don't have to be these mindset shifts or big business books, something relative to you in your field. As Mr. Tharik has kindly just shared with us. Are you a ketchup or mayo kind of person?
Oh, I'm neither anymore, but I probably lean towards mayo as I've got older, yeah.
Okay. And finally, obviously, you're not a business owner, but if you could have the choice of being a business owner, a freelancer, an employee, what would be your preferred choice?
A freelancer, because I like the freedom to choose what I want to work on.
That's absolutely amazing. I've absolutely loved having you on today. It's been absolutely amazing for you to join us today. I've learned so much from you. I could talk to you for hours and hours on end. So everybody, please give me a hand and a warm clap to Mr. Tharik today. It was absolutely fantastic having you. I can't wait to read your book, inshallah. I'm definitely going to be reading it. If you want to quickly just share your socials on here, or if you want, I'll be attaching the link somewhere around this podcast anyway.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn and Facebook. And if you just type in my name as it's spelled, Tharik Hussain, you'll see my picture because I have them on all of them.
All right, perfect, amazing. Jazakallah khair for coming. Subhanak ya Rabbi bihamdik. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And inshallah, guys, I'll see you in the next episode of the Speak Sense podcast. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.